place, Boston, Massachusetts. The date, November 28, 1942. World War II was in full swing. Medical schools were turning out physicians in record numbers to replace those called up to active duty. The famous Hollywood cowboy, Buck Jones, was visiting Boston on a promotional tour. He was present at Fenway Park when Boston College went down to defeat in an upset victory by Holy Cross. In humiliation, Boston College team canceled their reservations for a victory party at the posh South End nightclub, the Coconut Grove. Buck Jones, however, was not so fortunate. He attended the club that night and would be pronounced dead at Mass General the following day. The Coconut Grove was Boston's finest nightclub, decorated in South Sea decor, with a roof that slid above the main ballroom for dancing under the stars in the summertime. The details of the fire are obscure, but this young busboy, Stanley Tomaszewski, was seen to light a match moments before the blaze erupted in a basement bar. He was ultimately blamed for the disaster, and well into the 1970s, when he became lieutenant colonel in Massachusetts National Guard, he received persistent death threats from unknown people at strange hours of the morning. The fire spread rapidly, feeding on the decorative materials and seemingly leaping through the air itself. It took a mere 12 minutes from the time of the initial flicker for the entire club to become engulfed with flames. Behind, panic and confusion reigned as many exit doors were locked or concealed. At this, the main entrance, a solitary revolving door, which became jammed with the crush of terrified people. 200 dead were found. That evening, two newlyweds, Helen and Jimmy, were out on the town. They were preparing to leave as Jimmy worked the night shift when the first wisps of smoke entered the main ballroom. In panic, they rushed toward the Shawmut Street exit. She lost consciousness en route. He dragged her to the door, only to find it locked, and then he lost consciousness. The specifics of their ultimate rescue are unknown, but they were probably pulled from the club by the fire department, who broke through the door. That evening, volunteers, servicemen, worked furiously to ferry victims to local hospitals in a sad convoy of ambulances and commandeered trucks and cabs. The bulk of the victims arrived at Boston City Hospital, arriving at the rate of one patient every 11 seconds. By night's end, 131 living and well over 200 dead had been processed. Among them was a young man, Gordon Bennett, who arrived in coma and respiratory distress. He was immediately recognized as one of the city hospital house officers. Despite the best efforts of his colleagues, he died that night. Also among the arrivals were Helen and Jimmy, both now conscious, both claiming that they couldn't see. He had suffered corneal burns in the fire, and she will be the subject of our discussion today. She was admitted to the hospital. A big red letter M was placed on her forehead, indicating that she had received morphine in the emergency room. Meanwhile, outside, family members milled around, searching for news of their loved ones. When the final accounting was made, 491 had died that evening. The impact of the tragedy was nationwide, and in many ways our present fire laws can be dated back to the revulsion experienced in this country at that time. And yet, out of the horror of the experience, a vast medical literature was generated by the physicians caring for the fire victims. New ways of managing burns were described, the first civilian use of penicillin, some of the earliest uses of positive end expiratory pressure, a new description of thermally induced spherocytosis in the blood of the victims. and on and on. The effort to treat the victims was spearheaded by Dr. Maxwell Finland, then head of the Harvard Medical Service at Boston City Hospital, and currently the head of infectious disease at Boston City. He examined personally every patient twice a day, all 131, covering miles of corridor. He was joined in his efforts by Dr. Charles Lund, who was working on a federal contract to study burn therapy as part of the war effort, and Dr. Charles Davidson, presently in private practice at Cape Cod. J.J. Byrne, currently head of surgery at Framingham Hospital. And George Clues, now at New England Deaconess Hospital. The junior member of the team was Dr. Stanley Levinson, who presently is the head of the burn unit at Jacobi Hospital in the Bronx. Among their tremendous achievements was the salvage of Clifford Johnson, a 22-year-old Coast Guardsman. He escaped the fire, but returned 4 times to rescue others. On the 4th trip, he was overcome by fumes and lost consciousness, and received third-degree burns over 55% of his body. At this point in history, 20% third-degree burns was considered fatal. And yet, after months of work, he remained alive. Fluids and nutrition were given until, finally, the battle of nitrogen balance was lost, and he developed massive anasarca. He became the first human in history to receive IV albumin, which had recently been fractionated from plasma, with miraculous resolution of the edema. He ultimately was grafted, and 1 year later walked out of the hospital. He fell in love with a nurse at City Hospital and brought her to his home in Missouri. He worked for the Parks Department, and one day, while driving through the woods, his Jeep overturned. He was trapped below, the gas tank ignited, and he was burned to death. While reviewing this extensive literature, I came upon a series of 2 papers by Dr. Alexandra Adler, describing the unusual case of Helen, who after recovering from cortical blindness was found to have lost the ability to read, despite intact writing skills. Dr. Adler was the daughter of the famous Viennese psychiatrist, Alfred Adler. She had trained under Otto Putzel, famous for his description of the syndrome of alexia without agraphia associated with color anomia, the so-called Putzel syndrome. Adler came to Boston City in 1935. At the time of the Coconut Grove in 1942, Boston City's neuro staff included Houston Merritt, Derek Denny Brown, and Raymond D. Adams, a veritable pantheon of American neurology. For many years, Adler was denied a position on the attending staff because she was a woman, and women had never been appointed to this position before. It was only when Denny Brown became department chairman and advocated for her strongly that tradition was broken, and she finally was appointed as the first woman attending in the hospital's history. Adler subsequently moved to New York in the early 1950s. In 1982, while crossing the street in front of her Park Avenue apartment, she was run down by a taxi cab. She was brought to Bellevue Hospital, initially listed as unknown white female, having broken 20 bones in her body. She remained in a coma for 6 weeks. And then, as if by miracle, she awakened. After a long 6 months of rehabilitation, she ultimately returned to her profession. I first met Dr. Adler 3 days after her discharge, and it is only with her assistance that I was able to locate Helen and perform the follow-up study I am about to describe.
I know that. You were pulling me my arm. I kept telling you how my arm was aching. Next thing I remember is somebody banged my head. I said my head hurts terrible. And I heard noises, engines. Right. And then the next thing I remember is that Dr. Denny Brown asking me who the President of the United States was.
Yeah.
No, who the first president was. That's what it was. And then who was President, what other questions did he ask me? I know that one in particular. What else did he ask me? No, I don't.
And what were things like for you then, when you were just, coming back to awareness?
Couldn't see a thing.
You couldn't see anything?
No. I could see fawns, but I couldn't make them out.
I see. How about your other senses?
My taste was sort of.
One dramatic thing was that you were blind.
That's it, yeah. But you know what I wondered about that? How come I didn't get panicky about it? See, I must have been out of it, that I didn't realize the seriousness of the whole thing. It must have been...
So you felt remarkably calm, despite the fact that you couldn't see.
I felt that everything was going to be all right. I had this feeling of me that everything was going to be fine. This was just a temporary thing. And I often wondered...
And in fact...
I often wondered, was that normal to feel that way? That's what I thought about later. Because my God, another thing, I used to have been frantic.
And how did things change as the days and weeks went on in the hospital?
I really think that it was the people around me, I think. And somehow, Dr. Adler, I don't know, she seemed more than just a doctor. She seemed so warm and so friendly. I really think that she had a lot to do with it, really.
How long did it take before you could see Dr. Adler?
Oh, it was quite a while.
Do you remember about how long?
It was quite a while, I think. It was really a long time.
Weeks?
I think so. Because I could recognize her by her voice. She had rather husky voice.
I see.
So a little hard to distinguish her first with her. But then after a while, I knew she was the one. But she was the one that stood out to me more than anybody, really.
How long did it take before you could really see fully again?
Oh, I don't know. It seemed like a long time. I can't offhand say exactly how long it did take a while.
Yes, it did. And then when you could once again see people and things, what did you notice was still wrong with your vision?
I really could. I could see them, but it wasn't really perfect. It was, a little blurred. And it was blurred for a long time. Even when I got home, it was blurred. It wasn't, it took a long time to really see perfectly.
And when you could see perfectly, what was still a problem for you?
Distance, figuring out places,
How about reading?
Reading signs. That was difficult.
How about reading books, newspapers?
I had a hard time with that. But as I say, I didn't read them, I went around them. That's what I often wondered if I should have done it that way.
Yeah.
If I should have looked at them point blank. But I couldn't make them out, that's why I went around them.
When you say went around, what do you mean?
Well, in other words, when I look at something right away, I couldn't make it out. So I had to figure it out. So I had to go, like when you have a word, and you can't make it out when you go around it,
See if you can figure it out.
You figure it out. In other words, I figured things out instead of looking at them, which I shouldn't have done that. I should have tried to look.
Well, I don't know. It sounds like you did what you could to get around things that were difficult for you.
That's right.
Yeah, including things like signs, huh?
Right.
Very good.
That's what I did for a long time now. I wondered if that was something I should have done.
And how about your reading and your writing?
The reading, anything in print is fine. The writing isn't good.
You've had trouble writing?
No, I don't have trouble writing. It's trying to read that after I write it.
You can write it okay, but have trouble reading it afterwards.
Right.
And you will have trouble reading it.
You will have trouble reading it afterwards.
Okay.
It'll take me a while. I can figure it out, but it'll take a while.
I see. Okay.
And
Well,
if I receive any writing, it takes me a long time, you know, to figure it out.
well, we'll try and see that in a moment. How about reading print, like a book or a magazine?
I don't have any trouble with that. It all depends how close together it is and how big it is, you know. If it's very
I see.
small print, that's out completely.
I see. But if it's larger print, that's
A larger
easier?
print, it's easy. It all depends on how it is. You know, sometimes a large print is, well, it's, the letters are different. You know, if they're fancy letters, that's where I have difficulty.
I see. Now let me show you some large print, see how it goes. Okay. Do you use your glasses to read?
All the time.
Okay.
Couldn't live without them.
Maybe you could read this large print right here.
Mm-hmm. New insights into S-E-D, new insights into ends. From,
Is this word a problem?
yeah, I wonder why it is. I guess you get it.
Why don't you try and spell it?
Okay. That's an E. E, D, E, I. Engine?
E, D, E. You said I?
Yeah,
Okay, and then the last letter is what?
that looks like looks like an L. L-O.
Okay. Let's move on. Start from here now.
That's from, Etters, Essex, Etters,
What's this letter here?
that's an E.
And the one before it? What's the large letter before the E?
That looks like an I. No, not an I, it can't be an I, there's no dots in that.
Okay, that's right. And then now here?
No. That's T-O-A-F,
Read it.
T-O, Tufern, or something like that.
Okay. Now let's take a look at here. What you mentioned was harder. You said that
Just these close together like that.
I see. Let's look at some large letters now that are in that fancy print that you mentioned. Can you read this line here?
It's a Chinese magazine? No, it can't be Chinese magazine. What's that? I can't read that. Magazine I can see.
What can you see?
I can see magazine.
That's right.
What's this? I can't see that. Is
This-
that China? No, it can't
This
be
word
China.
here?
No, it's that. No, I don't know.
Okay.
That's York, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. And what's the word prior to that?
I can't figure it out. Let's see. I can't, C-H-A. No, that's my difficulty. It's taking all
Okay.
day to figure it out.
I see. Okay. Well, let's look at something here in smaller print that you said was sometimes a problem. Okay. Can you read here?
Right. Although millions of American women although millions of American women use mascara daily, it can be one of the ticklish cosmetics to apply, particularly for those who
Mrs. Mary?
Oh, that's Mary?
Yes.
God, I couldn't even read that.
Yeah. Mrs. Mary McClellan.
Almost Mary McClellan.
Could you write that here? In your script, your regular handwriting.
Okay.
Would you now write in your handwriting the letters of the alphabet in capitals, in capital letters, in your handwriting.
Y. I always have trouble with Y's. Y. No, it's Y. Z is like this, right? I always have trouble with that Y and Z.
Mm-hmm.
Try Z.
Try Y and Z again.
I have trouble with Y and Z. Y and Z. I always have trouble with Y and Z.
All right.
There's a figure here that I'd like you to copy exactly as you see it with this pen. Okay. Right here to the right, copy exactly what you see here. Okay. Okay?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. And now, the same thing with this one. Copy exactly what you see there. Very good. And now this third one, copy that, please.
Q. S. T. Y. I always have trouble with Y's. Y. No, it's Y. Z is like this, right? I always have trouble with that Y and Z.
Mm-hmm.
Try Z.
Try Y and Z again.
I have trouble with Y and Z. Y and Z. I always have trouble with Y and Z.
All right.
I
Okay.
have to practice.
Very good. And now for this. There's a figure here that I'd like you to copy exactly as you see it with this pen. Okay. Right here to the right, copy exactly what you see here. Okay. Okay?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. And now, the same thing with this one. Copy exactly what you see there. Very good. And now this third one, copy that, please. Okay, very good, thank you. Right here.
Turn your pen around now.
Okay, good, thank you.
I can see by the dawn daily light.
Okay, let's write that right here in your normal handwriting.